created our promise.html file in which we have created the additional logic divided demo. Okay, and we have referenced our promise.js file within the script tab. So in our promise.js file, we have created a promise object, and inside it constructor we are sending an anonymous function, and within that function we are sending two parameters. The first one is the resolve callback function and the second one is the reject callback function. Okay, and within this anonymous function we have set timeout function, within which we are calling a resolve callback function with a string hello world. Okay, and the second parameter of the set timeout function is the timeout timing, which is 2000 millisecond, that is 2 seconds. Okay, next we are writing promise.then. So when the promise gets resolved, this then method will be executed. Okay, and within this then method we are sending another anonymous function with the parameter data. Okay, and then we are putting our console.log inside it, in which we are going to enter data in the console. So the producing code essentially sets a timeout to resolve the string hello world after 2 seconds. So what's going to happen with this promise is, once this promise resolves, which is going to take 2 seconds, that hello world is going to be passed to the consuming function, and we can see it says promise.then. So hello world will be assigned to data and will log data to the browser console. So when we run this in the browser, what we should see essentially is a 2-second pause, and then we'll see the hello world code appear inside our console since our promise is resolved. Okay, now let's see a more complex version of this example. We'll have our same producing code. So we can see the set timeout function that will resolve hello world after 2 seconds. Okay, now notice we have a chain of consumers. We essentially have 3 consuming functions that will run one after another, and we will see they will output hello world 1, hello world 2 and hello world 3. Once the promise is resolved, all of the consuming function run. That is, all of this will run one after another. It's not going to be a 2-second delay between all of this. The promise is only resolved once. Okay, so see the output: hello world 1, hello world 2, hello world 3. Okay, so our conclusion is that promise only resolves once. So let's move on to our third example, where we will show that a promise can also resolve an error. So now here on line 4, we have used reject function instead of the resolve function. That's going to send the rejection to our resolving function. So on line 9, we can see that the function success takes the data and console logs it out, and then there's a function error that will run the console error command. So essentially this is an error, will be the reject message which we'll get in our console. This code is essentially simulated in error. Okay, so a lot of async operations depend on external resources that we have no control over and may end in an error. For example, let's say we were requesting an image from a third-party website. That's an asynchronous operation. Since we don't know how long it's going to take the image to load, and we could end in an error where we don't receive the image at all. That's the case where we would use this error code, similar to how we can chain successful resolutions to our promise. We can chain error resolutions also. Okay, we can notice here there's a number of different consumer functions here. Okay, all of which console.error and then have a number. They also of course console.log in the case of success. But if we look at the promise here itself, this promise simply rejects after the promise. So we are going to get, this is an error 1, this is an error 2 and this is an error 3. Let's go ahead and resolve this in the browser. So here's the output. This is an error 1, this is an error 2 and this is an error 3. And of course each one has the error info and has the red error symbol here. So we know that's an error. So let's go through an example for the real world. So well, here I have applied the concept to a web service. This is an asynchronous operation. This is zip code. We need to input the zip code and then click on this get info button to get the name of the state. So basically it contacts the server and tells us what's the state for that zip code. Okay, so in our JS file we have just created the button get info reference. Okay, now the dot on click is a kind of a shortcut for an event listener. Okay, so basically we are adding the event listener for the click event, and here we are having our function implementation too. We have created a const zip in which we are putting our document get element by id zip dot value, and we have put our URL from which we are going to fetch our JSON into zip URL. Then we have put console.log zip URL, and on line number 7 we have const fetch promise equal fetch zip URL. So basically it's going to fetch our JSON and put into fetch promise const. Next we have our fetch promise dot then. So basically when this fetching of JSON gets successful, then we move on to our line number 8. So basically we'll get a JSON response. Now we don't know how long it's going to take the API to return that JSON data we just looked at on. Okay, so on line 7 we have our fetch promise that gets whatever is returned by fetch zip URL. Fetch returns promise, so we are gonna able to resolve based on that promise. On line 8 we have fetch promise dot then, so the then will execute once we get a return from the API, and all we are going to do initially is take the response and turn it into a JSON object that we can easily pass once we have the JSON object, which is passed to the next part of the chain as data variable, and we will console.log it out. Now I'm going to get out of the JSON the place name, that is the state, and then I'm going to post that to get element by id info.innerHTML, okay, within it. So if we look at the fetch parts of this again, once we produce the URL based on the user input, then we can contact the actual API via fetch. Fetch returns a promise. We catch that promise in fetch promise, which is why we are able to do fetch promise dot then. Fetch promise dot then waits until we have a response, and then it processes that response as JSON and passes it to the final part of our promise, where we take the data and we pass it to get the place name, that is state. So normally the JSON data is properly formatted. If it is properly formatted, we can use the dot notation, and if it's not, then we have to somehow get a workaround for it, okay, to retrieve the data from a JSON. So it depends, entirely depends on the JSON object, how it's being sent to us. So now let's check this out. Let's enter a zip code, say 400012, get info. So it's showing us Maharashtra. Let's enter another zip code, okay, and click on get info, showing us Andhra Pradesh. Okay, similarly we enter 700011, showing us West Bengal. So here we can see exactly how the promise is used in the real world for an asynchronous activity. So that's all for today. Let's meet with a new video on a new topic. Till then, happy coding.